not represent what the American people want. All the polls show that the American people don't want a new war. The American people are sick and tired of our money being wasted on bombs and weapons and destruction, provoking a war with China, provoking a war with Russia, while our trains are derailing, people in the United States are suffering, our water's not being purified, our railroads are falling apart, our power grids are falling apart, and yet we pour more and more weapons and money into some stupid confrontation with China. China is not our enemy. Wall Street bankers are our enemy. No more provocations against China. China is not our enemy. 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 Get out of our country. Stop trying to sell war in our country. Stop trying to sell war in our country. We don't want a new war with China. We love America and we don't want a new war with China. China is not our enemy. Stop trying to sell war. Get out of our country. Stop trying to sell war. China is not our enemy. I'm a patriotic American. I love my country and I don't want World War III.
大家好，这里是小镇小民。刚才这一段小的视频就是蔡英文在窜访美国的时候，美国的一个当地的组织对他的窜访进行的抗议。组织这个活动的这个人，他叫 Maupin， 我就叫他莫平。他是一位广受赞誉的演说家、作家、记者和政治分析家。他曾经在中东和拉丁美洲广泛的旅游。早期规划阶段的时候就参与了占领华尔街运动，并参与了许多争取社会正义的活动。他是国际友谊与合作以及21世纪社会主义的直言不讳的倡导者。他是政治创新中心的创始人和思想领袖。他的最新的著作叫做《美国走向何方？川普的 MAGA 会开辟通往社会主义的道路吗？》我非常有幸能够找到他采访他，我跟他谈了关于蔡英文窜访的事情，关于美国的共产主义运动、共产党的情况，还有中美关系、美国现况等等很多事情。聊了1个小时，所以我把它分成4部分跟大家分享。You did this protest in New York. I just want to thank you on behalf of me. And I know a lot of people would want me to on behalf of them, many Chinese. Thank you for that.
Great. Well, you're very welcome. I did it because I'm an American and I don't want a new world war, you know.
Yeah, that's my first question. So what propels you to do it, that you protested? And you are with some friends, also someone helped you, right? So you guys had a sign out and then you filmed it and everything. So tell us what propels you to do it.
Well, I started something called the Center for Political Innovation, which is a group. We are people that are interested in socialism and communism and such, but we view things from a little bit of a different perspective. We realize that the woke left that supports all the regime change wars around the world, that demonizes Russia and China, and that really wants to destroy the country and tear down the United States, that doesn't really have a future. And we view socialism as making a better country. And it's just common sense right now that with our railroads falling apart and trains derailing and toxic chemicals being spewed everywhere, with our water treatment facilities falling apart, with our power plants in shambles, the last thing that America should be doing is spending more money on trying to escalate a confrontation with the biggest country in the world in terms of population, the second largest economy in the world. Getting into a fight with China right now is like the stupidest thing in terms of what the American people would benefit from. There's nothing for us to gain. And so as a patriotic American who loves my country and somebody who understands that these kind of wars are waged for the big banks and corporations that run the United States, I saw that Tsai Ing-wen was coming to the United States to lobby for more weapons and try to escalate further to put the people on the island she claims to represent in more danger because they'll suffer if there's a war, and also to put Americans in harm's way and to beg for more of our tax money to be wasted on a confrontation. I thought it was a good thing to go and confront her, and I did.
Yeah, and in terms of arms sale, actually, I don't think there's enough talking about, the 3 communique between China and the US that signed with the 3 countries, which is basically the funding documents of the 2 countries' relationship. The third one, which is signed by President Reagan, actually specifically said US is going to gradually reduce the amount of arms sales to Taiwan. And that was signed in 1982. So it's 40 years later. If the US government has been doing that by now, there shouldn't be any arms sale if they follow it through, because it's signed back then saying gradually reduce, right? You would think 40 years it should be. But nobody talking about that. Essentially what the US government doing now is illegal in a way because Reagan signed that. But nobody bring it up ever. In fact, recently they just had some kind of a war game thing that happened with this Chinese community, right? With the Congress. So it seems like there's just more, and I mean, their conclusion for that war game was more arms for Taiwan. So that's my next question is, where does the US and China relationship go? Because it seems like there's obsession about being tough on China. Everybody's competing, who is more tougher, you know, that kind of thing. Where does this go? Is the war unavoidable now, in your opinion?
Well, I think that the reason that document was signed in 1982 with the language the way it was, and the reason the USA is not fulfilling that is because geopolitics has certainly significantly changed since that time. You know, we know that the Soviet Union, when they cut off relations with China and stopped helping China build itself up, that was a devastating blow. And China needed support internationally. They needed allies. It was a country that needed to move ahead. And so China was kind of forced by, you know, the Soviet Union and Khrushchev's betrayal to turn elsewhere for allies. And so China and the United States at the same time saw the Soviet Union as its main enemy. Ronald Reagan called them an evil empire. And so, you know, starting with Nixon, but then later with Jimmy Carter, who formally established relations, and then with Ronald Reagan as president, there was a feeling that the United States could kind of align with China and use China as an ally against the Soviet Union. And so that's what was going on there. But they didn't understand that China has a very long-term vision. And China, the whole time they were getting foreign investment, that they were building up their own economy. In the United States, there's this assumption that if a socialist country adopted market mechanisms, that would just lead to the overthrow of communism, right? That the Communist Party would just be toppled. And that worked in Eastern Europe. It worked in Poland. It worked in Czechoslovakia. It worked in the Soviet Union. But in China, the opposite happened. You know, the Communist Party was able to adopt more market mechanisms. But in doing so, they raised the living standards of the population. They won over sections of the middle class who at the time of Mao's death had become somewhat anti-communist. You know, we know the riot that went on after the death of Zhou Enlai. It was like an anti-communist riot. Many of the people that were alienated by the Cultural Revolution saw the liberalization and the reform and opening up under Deng Xiaoping as a great opportunity, and that won them back to supporting the Communist Party. And today, the Chinese Communist Party is much stronger, I would argue, than it was during the final years of the Cultural Revolution. And that went against the U.S. prediction. 1989, the USA was hoping that they could turn the Tiananmen events into a color revolution to overthrow the Chinese government, but it didn't work. What worked very well around the same period in, you know, Czechoslovakia and East Germany and all these places, it didn't work in China because China has a different system, and the Chinese Communist Party had a stronger relationship with its population. And so because of that, China has continued to build itself up. The Communist Party has gotten stronger. The living standards have continued to go up. And so now, while back in the 80s, the United States and the Wall Street imperialists were interested in using China as an ally against the Soviet Union, now they see China as a competitor. And so, of course, they're going to throw more weapons and more support to a government that they technically don't even recognize, right? I mean, the USA recognizes one China, and the government is in Beijing, you know, it's in the mainland, but yet the USA is willing to throw more and more weapons to the island on Taiwan because, you know, now their geopolitical position has shifted, and now they see China as a threat rather than a useful ally against the Soviet Union.
Yeah, yeah. And so they just, even though they signed that, they don't follow it anyway, based on what happened. Okay.
Like they promised Russia that NATO would not expand eastward, and it did. I mean, they don't keep their promises.
No. Okay. Because the reason I'm asking is because when I was in China, I always got this impression, at least that I was told, that in the West, they always rule of law is very strong. You know, everything, if it's law, it's the law. But surprising to me that the US government could just ignore it. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, just like, the Uhuru movement. These are a group of black socialist activists that are being charged with being Russian agents simply because they had some web conferences and some Zoom meetings. The USA is always lecturing the world about human rights and how we protect free speech here. But now they've arrested 4 activists and are threatening them with 10 years in prison just for statements they've made about the Ukraine war. So it's a lot of hypocrisy. The rule of law in the United States is not what it claims to be. And this rhetoric about a rules-based global order serves a similar purpose.
Yeah.
我是台湾人是没有错，我是中国人，因为我念中国书长大，我受的是中国式的教育。我是台湾人是没有错，我是中国人，我是中国人，我是中国人，我是中国人，我是中国人。